can't move, but we'll use those for setup. If it dries up when we're done, then we can sit in here, whatever. But let's plan on getting tables put in here. There's going to be several folding tables and the picnic tables, which are, I guess they're back out there. Okay, two of them are. And then you'll have about an hour to get everything cooked and warmed up and whatever else. I think that's it. After this is after, yes.
All right, the potluck starts roughly at 5. Be sure to see Jonathan with your dish. He'll show you where it needs to be displayed. All right, with that being said, it is my pleasure to introduce to you for the first time at Midwest Preparedness Project, the #1 ranked boxer in the ABO and the 8th ranked heavyweight champion of the world, a local legend right here from Kansas, John the Iron Man Cantrell.
Bunker Buster Bobby, thank you for the fabulous introduction, my friend. How's everyone doing? Are we prepared? All right, well, sorry, Patrick, don't invite a pastor if you don't want a little bit of a sermon. We're going to start off with a little reading, then we'll get into all the fun things, okay? All right, so Matthew 25, 1 through 13. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a cry, "Here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "Since there will not be enough for us and for you, go rather to the dealers and buy for yourselves." And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered, "Truly, I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour that the Lord will return." All right, when most people hear preparedness, what do they think of? Right? Radios, generators, food. What else? Right. All the things that we want to be prepared for in case the inevitable, right? The worst happens, right? These are all things we want. So right now, and what I'm going to talk to you about today are storms, right? Because we're preparing for storms. You guys are preparing for storms. So a great pastor, Kevin Van Duser, once told me, "John, you're either walking into a storm, walking through a storm, or walking out of a storm. Those are the 3 cycles of life that we have." Right? How do we prepare for those storms? Right? You guys can collect all the goods, you can have all the ammunition, you can have all the supplies, you can have the generators, you can have all of these things. But what about those storms that are outside of our control? What about when one of our family members gets cancer? Right? What about when one of us loses a child? What about when one of our family members is struck with addiction or alcoholism? Right? Something that they cannot free themselves from. Something that they no longer have the ability to control. What about those storms of life that come, and they do, inevitably for all of us? Things happen that are outside of our control that we cannot handle on our own. All right, I'm going to open with a quick word of prayer. Father God, we thank you so much for this opportunity to fellowship and to come together and to share our stories and our trades and our gifts with one another, just as you designed us to do. Lord, we pray that your Spirit moves. We pray that you rid everything that I'm going to say of me, and you just speak through me, Father. Lord, we thank you so much for this time. We ask that you bless the Midwest Preparedness Project. You bless all the inhabitants and everybody that came here out to the lake for this fine, fun festival, and that we all have a really good time. In Jesus Christ's perfect name we pray. All God's children said, Amen. All right, so I've got kind of a strange story. Do you guys like stories? All right, cool, because I'm going to tell you a story. So once upon a time, about 5 years ago, well, it'd be 6 years ago now, my wife and I, we just gone through a hard patch of life. And, anytime we go through something hard or anytime the weight of the world starts to crush us, right, we want to ask God, why? God, why is this happening? God, why is this happening to me? Right? And I'm gonna propose to you right now that while we may not always know immediately, if we keep our eyes open, God will show us His plan in everything that happens. So, my wife and I had been trying to conceive a child. Right? The one thing that I wanted more than anything in the world was to be a dad, and I wanted to be a good dad. I had a great father, and I came to learn over time that God the Father was a great father to me, and I wanted to be the same kind of father to my son that God the Father and my earthly father both were to me. So my wife, we went to dinner with a pair of our friends, and we prayed with them. We had prayed over one of the friends to pass an exam so that she could get a license for nursing. And then in return for that, they bought us dinner and invited us to go out, and they prayed over us so that we would be able to conceive. Well, 3 days later, we found out that my wife was pregnant. Amen. So, this is the most excited I've ever been about anything in my entire life. I had walked through so much hell in life, and I never thought that I was going to be able to have a child. And it's finally happening. Right? This is the coolest thing. There's nothing more fun in life than being a parent, right? We all parents here, parents, right? You guys will get to experience that someday, long, long ways down the road. Long ways down the road. So, I wanted, like my son and I, right? I wanted to have a relationship and that connection with him from day one, right? So as soon as my wife's stomach started showing that little guy was in there and growing, right, I immediately started doing things with him, right? I read the New Testament to my wife's stomach while my son was in there swimming around, right? Any Lord of the Rings nerds out there? So I read the Lord of the Rings trilogy to my son because I wanted him to like the books that we liked. I put those headphones, those Beats headphones on her stomach so that he would like, 38 Special and Leonard Skinner and all the cool music, right? All the things. And I was just I was so excited. And I can remember praying, I've always been somewhat of an athlete, and my wife has always been a huge brain, right? I chose to marry. I way outkicked my coverage with my wife, but my wife has always been kind of a genius, and I've always been kind of an athlete. And I didn't pray for my son to be an athlete like me. I didn't pray for him to be a genius like his mom. I prayed that my son would have the relationship with God from day one that it took me 26 years to find, right? So 9 months of pregnancy. Do you guys remember that fun time, COVID? How fun that was when the world shut down and they said you can't go to church and you can't go anywhere and you can't be around people and everybody just kind of stay home and rot. So my wife and I had a blast during COVID. We both got sent home to work from home. I was the director of project management, estimation, and sales for a large steel company at the time, and my wife worked for the state in the Department of Corrections, which you'll get why I'm laughing about that here in a little bit. But we had a good time, right? We got to go out and eat out every meal, and we both have good paying jobs, so we were kind of able to do whatever we wanted, and we had a good time. So guys out there who have had pregnant wives, do you know what sympathy weight is? Okay, so sympathy weight is when your wife is getting to consume large amounts of food for both her and her unborn child. Out of sympathy for that, you get to eat all those things too, right? So when my wife got pregnant, I was a pretty healthy 240. And then how about COVID weight? Anybody put on some COVID weight? So my sympathy weight combined with my COVID weight turned into about 80 pounds. And by the time my wife and I went to the hospital to have a child, to have our baby, I was sitting at about 315 pounds. I was a big old boy. So the entire 9 months, right, we are going in for the checkups and all the standard things. And every time they're saying, perfect pregnancy. You guys have had such a perfect pregnancy. Everything's going so well. Everything looks so good. And I don't know about you, but anytime people start telling, like, especially now, anytime somebody's telling me that something is perfect, I immediately take a step back and I go, whoa, wait, nothing is perfect. So guys, we go in and the day finally comes and we have Taylor's last checkup on Wednesday, and we schedule her to have her scheduled induction for the following Monday. And so on Sunday, I can't wait. We got any other impatient people out there? I was ready for this kid to be out. I wanted to see him. I hadn't named him yet. So the game plan was I wanted a John Jr. And my wife was like, there's not a chance that you were going to name our son John because I don't want a junior. So I said, okay, this is the deal. You're going to have this kid. He's going to come out. I'm going to hold him. You guys remember the Lion King? Savannah! Right? I'm going to hold him up. God's going to give me the name. I'm going to name the kid. And we're going to be rocking and rolling. So we go in and, everything's normal. And I bring my laptop because I'm going to work. When I'm not doing this, I'm going to be working. All these other insane things, right? When we think that we are in control of the world around us and that the storms of life and the storms of the world, like we have these periods of life where everything's just quiet and peaceful and everything's okay. And then we have those times where everything's not. So we go in on Sunday, and like I said, I'd taken my laptop and we'd stopped and we'd had like our last meal before it was just going to be hospital food for the next week or so. And everything seemed fine. I go in and I'm joking around with the nurses and, chopping it up with everybody. And they put the fetal heart monitor on my wife. And they say, hey, something's not quite right. So the doctors tell her, they say, Miss Cantrell, we want you to lay on your side. And he was having D-cells. So every time my wife was having a contraction, it was affecting his heart. They said, sometimes this happens. We're going to have you lay on your side. There's a small chance that we might have to have a C-section, emergency C-section, but there's nothing to worry about. Within minutes, they came back into the room and said, we need to take him out right now. It's time. We need to go. We need to move now. And we know, right? God blessed us with kind of special powers to know when things are wrong, right? And that moment when you know that something life-changing and life-altering is about to happen in your life, and you can literally feel your heart fall out of your chest, and that you're about to be going through the ringer. That feeling set very harshly upon both my wife and myself. So they take us down to the operating room, and everybody's rushing around, and everybody's getting everything set up, and they're trying to hurry because our son is not doing well. So they stuffed me into this little paper outfit that's about 6 inches too short, and it's up to my calves and up to my elbows. And I sit down next to my wife, who is in a panic, worried about our unborn son. And they cut my wife, and they tell her to push, and they pull out this huge, beautiful 9.5-pound baby boy. I mean, he is just absolutely gorgeous, but he's not crying. So the doctor that had pulled him out took him around, and there was this big paper partition that separated the operating room. And I stayed with my wife. God clearly defines our responsibilities. Our first love is Him. Our second love is our wife, and then our kids. I stayed with my wife. I wanted to make sure that my wife was okay. So I'm there for what seemed like just a short moment, and the nurse that had been standing next to me comes around the paper partition, and she comes over and she grabs me and she says, Mr. Cantrell, we need you to come with us. I need you to come with me. So I follow her and I walk around that paper partition. And on the other side of that, the delivery doctor has my son's head in one hand and his chest in the other, and he's shaking him like this. And I took 2 very hard, intentional steps toward that doctor that was shaking my son. And the nurse very wisely understood what was happening, and she put her hand on me and she says, Mr. Cantrell, we're trying to revive your son. He was stillborn. So I didn't know what to do. Nothing that I had ever been through in my life had prepared me for a moment like that. So I do what any good father would do. I get down on my hands and knees and I start begging God for a miracle. And I get down and I press my head to the floor of the operating room floor as hard as I can to try to humble myself as much as possible before God. And I beg him, please, 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 please. I can't go home with an empty car seat. And I cannot go tell my wife that we're going to go home without our kid. So for 12 and a half minutes, I sat there in prayer and supplication, begging God, please, 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 I will do anything. I will dedicate the entire rest of my life to serving you and ensuring that everybody that I bump into knows who you are and what you did for me. Please help me. After 12 and a half minutes, Jesus Christ rose my son from the dead like Lazarus. I watched a literal biblical miracle happen in front of my eyes. There are certain things that we see in life that we can't unsee, right? Once that had happened, there was no backsliding. There was no turning around. I knew exactly what had happened. I knew exactly who had done it. And I knew that there was something more coming. So I'd like to say that it got really easy from there, but it didn't. It got worse, right? So he was alive, but what is life without quality of life, right? So he had a hole in his heart. He had a collapsed lung. He had been suffocating in the womb since Wednesday. The oxygen in my wife's placenta had gone bad, and he had been suffocating. So they immediately, after they got him revived, they put him on fentanyl and morphine at a day old. The lactic, so you know when you overwork a muscle group, right? Ladies, I know you've spent a hard day on your hands and knees in the garden pulling weeds or planting something, right? And the next day your legs are just so sore. So what that is that's from a lactic acid buildup in your muscles. And what happens is that those muscles get depleted of oxygen, and then lactic acid builds up, and then you feel an immense amount of pain. So my son had that all over his body in the worst possible and unimaginable pain you could think of. So the first week that we're there, they ask us on 5 separate occasions how we want to say goodbye to our son. You know, at one point in time, it was, his heart rate had dropped below 19 beats per minute. And it was due to the pain. Part of it was because of the pain medication, because of the morphine and the fentanyl. Like, it was slowing his heart rate. And, you have to start answering really hard questions. What kind of steps do you want us to take to keep your son alive? Right? Do you want us to give him chest compressions? There's a chance when we give him chest compressions that we could crack his sternum and break his chest. And we already knew that he was suffering horrible, horrible, horrible brain damage. So right after they had gotten him back to life, I went up and I told my wife, they're working on him. He's fighting. I don't know what's going to happen yet. I couldn't tell my wife what was going on. It would have literally killed her. So they'd finally gotten him stabilized, and then they asked us to come down and see him for the first time. And he's hooked up to every machine you could possibly imagine. They've got my son in this little 6x6, 8x8 room that looks like a jail cell. And there's so many machines and so many doctors and so many nurses in there, you can't tell anything that's going on. And then they proceed to tell us that for the last few hours, every couple of hours, he's having a 45-minute seizure that is destroying more of his brain. So all these horrible things start to happen, right? And so here's basically the progression. The doctors come to us and they tell us what needs to happen for him to survive. And this is the heart of COVID. My wife and I had never been parents. We don't know what to expect. We don't know what's going to happen. And we have nobody there to support us. So I reached out on social media and I said, please pray for my son. And I wrote down and typed out exactly what the doctors said needed to happen for him to survive. I made a post. I put it out. It went internationally viral. There were churches in 9 different countries praying for my son. The doctors would tell us what needed to happen. I would make a post. The world would pray. The doctors would come back within hours and tell us that a miracle had happened. I got to watch that happen every day for 6 weeks. For 6 weeks. So they told me that my son would never walk. He would never talk. He was going to be completely blind, completely deaf, severe epilepsy, severe cerebral palsy, and whatever short amount of time he had on this earth, he was going to be miserable. I don't know what God you guys serve, but I know what the God I serve can do. So we refuse to hear that. We refuse to hear that. Over the next several years, and sorry, everybody take a breath. Everybody take a deep breath. So I have a walking, talking, hearing, seeing, running, speaking, drawing, puzzle, Guitar Hero playing little boy now. Yeah. So everybody can breathe. Everybody can breathe. He is known in Topeka as the mini pastor. He stands at the front of the church in front of the worship band with his little arms up, singing, praising God at the top of his lungs. And like I said before, remember, I didn't pray that he'd be an athlete. I didn't pray that he'd be a genius. I prayed that he would have the relationship that it took me 26 years to find. And guys, he's had it since day one. I envy that kid's relationship with God. Oh my goodness. All right, so I tell you that to tell you this, right? So about a year, almost a year to the date before my son was born, my wife and I had almost divorced, right? And I had relapsed on methamphetamine and alcohol. And I'd kicked my wife out of our forever home that we just bought. And I proceeded to lie, cheat, steal, adultery, all the horrible things. All of them. To my everlasting regret and shame. And I praise God for his forgiveness. And I praise my wife for her forgiveness. But I was horrible. I was horrible. When I am under the influence of drugs and alcohol, I am not myself. Now, I'm not saying that as an excuse, but I'm just telling you, when our brains are not in their proper mindset, bad things happen. So, so let's run back to the beginning and then we'll get here, right? Are you guys in for the story still? Okay. So, I grew up in an upper middle class family. You guys know what Wolf Creek Nuclear Operating Corporation is down there in Burlington, Kansas? All right. Well, my dad down there worked down at that plant for about 35 years, and I went to Linden for elementary and middle school. I grew up on Pomona Lake. I went to high school in Burlington to play sports. They had a killer basketball team. You guys remember Tyrell Reed, KU national champions, right? I wanted to go play basketball with Tyrell Reed. So my dad taught me honesty. He taught me integrity. He taught me hard work, right? All these really, really important and godly values that every man needs to know in life, right? He showed me how to be a man. But my dad, sometime in his college career, lost sight of God and became an atheist. And then that carried over into him raising us. We grew up in a house without God, right? Now, that's not saying that we didn't have all of those other things, right? All those important characteristics, godly characteristics, but it was lacking the spirit, love, joy, and peace of God. God provides us with our purpose in life. I grew up not knowing my purpose, not knowing why I was here, what I was here for, what I was supposed to be doing. So as the storms in life come, I'm a gifted athlete. It's my senior year in high school. I'm getting ready to go play Division I college football. I was known as the hard-hitting linebacker, right? If John put a hit on you, it was something that seemed like a tattoo. It was something you couldn't rub off. So I was kind of notorious for tackling people and spearing them with my helmet because I wanted to inflict as much pain as possible. So when I hit them, they'd remember me forever. So third to last game my senior year, I spear somebody with my helmet during a kickoff return, and I crush 3 vertebrae in my back, and I'm told that I'm probably not going to walk and that I'll never play football again. So much about who we become and what our lives are is based on our identity. My identity at that time was, my name's John Cantrell, and I'm a football player. That's who I am. That's what I do. Without God telling me what my identity was, right? I didn't have that. All of a sudden, I don't have an identity. I'm nobody. So that lack of identity, right? I found that all of a sudden, in all the places I didn't fit in, and this lack of questions and this lack of purpose in life, drugs and alcohol became a really good friend of mine. So I started drinking, and then I became John's the good time, right? I'm good time Johnny. Well, that became the new identity. So fast forward, right? I'm an alcoholic all the way through college, and I don't know how. By the grace of God, I managed to graduate. It was probably because my older sister is really smart, and she helped me the whole way. Love you, Casey, if you're listening. Love you. Thank you. But after college, once again, like I was going to be a high school history teacher that taught high school kids that Christianity was a crutch for weak-minded people who couldn't solve their own problems. Doesn't God have a sense of humor? So I graduate. I do a year of student teaching at Lowther Intermediary in Emporia, and then I'm off and I'm on my own. And all of a sudden, I don't have the structure of my family, and I don't have my normal support group, and I don't have all of these guardrails to keep me in the line, right? So I'm not going to take you through the whole horror story, but I became severely addicted to methamphetamine and cocaine, and then opiates on top of that, which at the time I never considered myself an alcoholic, but every time I would try to get sober, I would take a drink first, and then as soon as I take a drink, within weeks, I would be back on the dope. I witnessed, was a part of horrible things. I don't know if any of you guys have ever experienced addiction. I don't know if you guys have ever been around that world, but it is hell on earth. I had gotten to a point, so I started dealing drugs to support my habit. And I'm kind of a 200-mile-an-hour guy. If I'm going in the right direction, I'm going 200 miles an hour. If I'm going in the wrong direction, I'm going 200 miles an hour. And I had gotten into some trouble, and I needed to make some money, and I needed to continue to support my habit. And I started dealing drugs at bars, and I thought that I'd found my new calling in life. Well, that didn't really work out super well either. So guys, I tried to get sober on several different occasions, right? I tried to do it by myself. I thought, man, I know the right way. I've got the right support system. My dad did not raise me like who I am now to be his son. This is not who my dad raised, right? If there was any amount of love that could have kept me sober or gotten me sober, I had 10 times more than I needed. I had so many friends and so much family and all these people that believed in me and knew me and saw me for the good that I had in me, but I could not see it in myself, right? And the storm continued to brew, right? The storm continued to brew. So an incredible thing happens. Somebody tries to kill me, actually in Lawrence, Kansas at the Jayhawk Motel. I don't know if any of you guys know where the Jayhawk Motel is, but I had been couch surfing and I had spent some time homeless. And I was in a bad way. So a friend of mine came and picked me up from rehab. We went to the Jayhawk Motel. It was a setup, the person was going to come in and hot shot me with a hot shot of dope and kill me and make it look like an accident. God managed to save me from all like that stuff. Like that happened on a monthly basis. And I know that probably sounds terrifying to you, and you can't believe that something like that would happen. But like I lived it, like multiple times. So I get out of that, and I decide I am done, right? And I come to the realization, like I can remember when I was a kid, my dad told me, John, the people, if you want to know what kind of person you are, look at your 3 best friends, right? If you want to know what kind of person you are, look at them, because that will tell you. You know, if your 3 best friends are gangsters and dope dealers and hustlers, it's probably who you are. And that's exactly what I became. So I came to the realization that I had to stop and that I needed to be removed from the situation and that I was willing to do whatever it took to achieve sobriety. And I knew that it wasn't within my grasp because I tried everything. I'd been to rehab 14 different times. I tried to quit by myself 100 times, right? Anybody ever try to quit, right? I'm not going to eat at night anymore. And then, you know, you make it a couple days and then you got a bowl of Captain Crunch and you're watching Netflix and you're doing your thing. You know, I had tried everything. So I go to my parents. My parents are like, okay, listen, we found this great spot in Florida. We're going to pay for you to go there. We want you to go there and we want you to get sober. And I said, this is going to work. It's going to work. So I go to Florida and I'm introduced to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? I immediately became a friend of Bill's. So my parents spent $40,000 a month for me to go get sober, and I end up getting sober in Alcoholics Anonymous for $1. Love you, Dad. Love you, Dad. But I'm introduced to the idea of a higher power, right? Now, when I had been in the drug world, I had witnessed and seen things that did not make humanly sense, right? I had experienced true evil, and I knew what it looked like, and I knew that it was more powerful than I was. So while I didn't know who God was and I didn't have a relationship with him, I really hoped that because I knew there was bad, I really hoped that there was good. So I start embracing the idea of a higher power, right? Giving me the power to do something that I can't do myself. So I get sober and I'm loving Florida, and my sponsor, Big Tom Murphy, man, he was an executive for Budweiser, and he retired when he got sober, and he moved to Florida, and he had all this money, and he had exotic car lots, and he sold $4.5 million Azimut boats, and had a property management company, and Big Tom was just the coolest. And Tom was like, John, listen, you've achieved sobriety, you're a smart kid, you got all this going for you, why don't you move down here? Why don't you move down here? And I want you to take over all my businesses. I want you to be my business manager. I'm like, absolutely, Tom, yeah, that sounds perfect, man. I couldn't imagine this. So I call my parents and I tell them what's going to happen. And all of a sudden, my parents are just so relieved. They finally got their son back. You know, I'm healthy again. I'm eating right. I'm exercising right. I'm doing all the right things. I'm going to meetings. I'm giving back, right? Service work. Being of service to other human beings is so important to our mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical health. So important. So I'm going to fly home. I'm going to pack up my stuff. I've got a little court case in Lawrence that I got to go deal with. I'm going to sign some paperwork at the courts. And then I'm moving to Florida to start my new life. So I come back. I pack up all my stuff. I go to my court case in Lawrence. I sign my piece of paper. I stand up. I turn around to walk out of the courtroom. And the U.S. Marshals stand up and arrest me for federal distribution of methamphetamine. Guys, when you finally feel like you're seeing daylight, right? You're walking through the storm. You're in the middle of the storm. There's this moment where the sun shines through and you're able to see the sunlight, and you get this immense amount of hope. And you realize you're in the eye of the storm. You realize you're in the eye of the storm. So at that moment, I decided that my life was over. And I didn't really want to go to prison. And I was tired of just hurting the people that loved me the most, right? I can remember when that happened and the U.S. Marshals placed me under arrest, just the look on my mother's face. You know, the last thing, like as a mother, the last thing you ever want is your children to be in pain and your children to be hurt. Right? That's the last thing we could ever imagine. Right? We just want our kids to be healthy and to be happy and to live good lives. You know, and my whole family had seen this ray of sunshine, not knowing that it was just the eye of the storm and that the real storm was just getting started. So I go to CCA in Leavenworth, and the judge releases me on pretrial release, and within 3 days of being home, I relapse. And I'm back on methamphetamine, I'm back running the streets, I'm back drinking, I'm back on opiates, I'm back doing all of my old things. My life is over. I make a plan to kill myself. And I don't know if you guys know the area by Pomona Lake very well, but there's a bar in Pomona called the 700 Club. Well, it used to be. It used to be a private club called the 700 Club. And it's right off of 268 Highway. And the game plan was I was going to go to the bar, I was going to shoot pool, I was going to drink all I could drink, I was going to get as stoned as I possibly could, and then on my way home I was going to kill myself. So I go to the bar and I get hammered and I have my fun and I say my goodbye to my friends, and I leave and I get on the road and I've got my seatbelt unbuckled and I've got all the windows rolled down in my car, and there's a big curve as you're coming around 68 Highway. You know that gas station that makes a really good fried chicken, Green Acres? So I'm about a half mile east of on 268 from that point right where the gas station is, or you can turn right and go over to the Federal State Park or the Federal Park on the other side of the lake. And I close my eyes and I get the car going about 120 miles an hour or so, and I let go of the steering wheel and I just hope for the worst. So the car goes off the road, skips the embankment, this huge embankment. It nose plants on the other side and sends my car airborne. And we go end over end, and then I land into a field, and it rolls side over side over side over side. And everything that was in the car went out the windows, except for me. So, you know, you talk about near-death experiences. We got any people who have almost tasted death? Right? They talk about this review where your life flashes before your eyes, right? And in that short few seconds that my car was flying through the air and glass and trash and cigarettes and just everything everywhere. I watched my life before my eyes. And I had this really strange and eerie feeling that something was protecting me, like I was in a cocoon while everything was happening. And everything stops, and the car's upside down, and I'm looking for a cigarette, and all there is shredded tobacco. So I'd had a pack of Marlboro Lights sitting on my lap, and when I had hit so hard on the embankment that the pack of cigarettes I had on my lap exploded, and all there was shredded tobacco everywhere. So I get out of the car, I crawl out of the window, and I walk back to the highway, through the field, back to the highway, and my girlfriend had left right behind me, and I didn't want her to see what I was going to do, and there was no way she was going to keep up with me. When I got to the road, she was pulling up, and she said, "John, was that your car?" And I said, "Yeah." And it looked like, you know, a Coke can when it's empty, you put it down, you crush it. That's what my car was. Nobody walks away from the accident that I walked out of. So I get home, she takes me home, and I go inside, and I have to tell my mother that I had relapsed and that I had tried to kill myself. And I watch her heart break in front of me. My father didn't even know what to say. He just stood up, walked past me, and went to his room. My heart was broken, right? Anybody who's been around suicide or seen suicide or been affected by suicide knows the amount of torment and pain and torture that someone is feeling to try to do something like that to themselves. So I was just broken. My soul was broken, my heart was broken, everything inside me was broken, and I just wanted to be good, and I just wanted to do good, and I just wanted to be a good son to my mom, and a good son to my father, and a good friend to my friends, and I wanted to live a healthy and productive life, and I just couldn't. No matter what I did, Satan was going to keep me right where he wanted me, and that was in the muck, and not having a relationship with God and not knowing who God was and who God said I was. I believe that I deserved it. So I go into my room and I get down on my hands and knees. Are you starting to notice a pattern here? I get down on my hands and knees and I cry out to the universe and I say, man, I don't know what is out there, but if there is a God, I need you right now because I'm going to kill myself. And everybody experiences Christ that has experienced him. Everybody experienced Christ in their own way. That was the moment that Christ chose to reveal himself to me. And in that moment, I knew that I was loved, that I was okay, that that God had a plan and purpose for me in my life. So I'm just going to tell you what happened. I literally felt like somebody had taken a blanket out of when you're cold and you've been outside playing in the snow for hours and your mom's like, hey, you need to come inside and warm up, right? And you sit down and you get that warm blanket right out of the dryer and it's wrapped around you and you just feel that warmth, and then somebody brings you a cup of hot chocolate with some melted marshmallows in it, right? All of a sudden I just had the strangest feeling that somebody had wrapped a warm blanket around me. And I heard a voice tell me, everything's going to be okay. And that was it. That was all I got. Everything's going to be okay. And I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with the Apostle Paul, formerly Saul, on the road to Damascus. The Lord comes upon him, strikes him blind, says, Saul, why are you persecuting my people? He said, Lord, Lord. And he knew exactly who the Lord was that he was talking to. There was no doubt in my mind. It wasn't Allah. It wasn't Buddha. It wasn't Krishna. It was the voice of Jesus Christ that had spoken to me. So I give my life to Christ that night. I open up the book, and all of a sudden, the book that I tried to read so many times to no avail, all of a sudden made perfect sense to me. And I understood who I was, what I was supposed to do, and how I was supposed to do it. So the next week, I turned myself into the U.S. Marshals. I say, listen, I'm not doing any good for myself on the street. I'm going to turn myself in and start doing my time. Right? I'm done being out here. I'm done being this person. God has a plan. Right? So I turn myself into the U.S. Marshals and I start doing my time. And God immediately starts putting good people in my life, right? Really good, strong Christian men who had made mistakes. Right? And they start leading me through the Bible and teaching me who God is and teaching me about who I am and who God says I am and what God wants from me. And for 3 years, I got to be alone, away from the noise of the world, so that God could work on me, teach me, and develop me into being the man that he wanted me to be when I got out. So the whole time I'm down, right, God had given me peace in one of the darkest, most miserable places on earth. The first time I was ever truly free in my life was behind federal prison bars because I had Christ with me. So I go through my time and God is working on me and I'm learning and I'm understanding things, and I've been cover to cover in that book, and I'd started repairing the relationships that I had damaged when I was out on drugs and alcohol. And then I start asking for a specific prayer. I say, God, please, if you put a good woman in my life, I can do anything you want me to do. Just please, please, please bless me with a good woman. And I prayed that, and I prayed that, and I prayed that, and I prayed that. And I get to short time, and I can remember they came and told me, so I just completed RDAP, which meant I got a year off my sentence for completing the program, and I got a guaranteed 6 months of halfway house. They came to let me know that my time was short and I was getting ready to go home. And I can remember asking God, if I'm not ready to go home yet, I would rather stay here and be with you than to go home and be who I was before. Well, September 21st of 2016, God so designed it that it was time for me to go home. But I had prayed every night, God, please bless me with a good woman. because I know I can do anything you want me to do in life. Just bless me with a good woman. So my parents drive all the way to Forest City, Arkansas, which they'd been driving there every 2 weeks for the last 3 years to visit me. And they bring my big fat red lab pumpkin, that sweet old soul, God rest her. And they brought me all the food that I hadn't eaten. And, Dad brought me a Cohiba so I could have a good smoke on the way home. I had a cigar with my dad and got to hang out and eat all the good stuff. And they drove me all the way back to Topeka, Kansas to 25th in California where the Federal Halfway House is. I opened the car door, I stepped out, and I shook my future wife's hand. She was the first person I met when I got home. She was completing her internship, her senior year at Washburn University, at the Federal Halfway House. So I can remember the first week I was there. My parents would come up and visit me every day, and everybody thought it was the cutest because most guys didn't have anybody, right? And my parents were coming up, and they'd bring me steaks to cook for all the other guys there, and and Taylor just thought it was the cutest. She fell in love with my cute dog first, and then she fell in love with my cute old dad. But I can remember telling my dad, I'm like, Dad, that's the kind of girl I want in my life. She's smart. She's strong. She won't put up with my BS. I'm going to marry that girl someday. And my dad said, John, why don't you worry about getting a job? He's like, son, listen, I love you, but that girl is so far out of your league. There is no way that's ever going to happen. A year later, we were married. So when we got married, my wife was not a believer. And I told her when we first got together, right, to all the alcoholics and addicts out there that understand themselves, I told her the very first thing, I said, listen, if I ever take a drink or use a drug, you need to get away from me as fast as you possibly can because I will ruin both of us and I will make it your fault. So Taylor did not understand addiction. Everything that she knew about addiction came from a textbook. So Taylor was not a Christian when we first got married. And that was a division. And I had started to move away from God. And I had started to put my daily care things, right? We're talking about being prepared. If you want to be prepared, you practice what you do. You practice situations. That way, when situations arise, you are prepared for them. Well, I had quit praying all the time. I had quit reading the Bible. I had quit fellowshipping with people who understood the Bible and other Christian people, right? And I had started going down another path. And I can remember telling my wife, listen, and my wife is younger than me. She's 5 years younger than me. I was 26 at the time. She was 21. And I said, listen, either I want to have kids or I want to have fun. And she said, well, what does having fun look like, John? I said, well, I'd like to have a drink every once in a while. My wife, not understanding addiction, right? And to be fair, right? So like, you guys understand what kind of guy I am. Like when I say I'm going to do something, it happens. Yeah, 200 miles an hour. Like, when I got out, I started working for Ernest Spencer Companies as a temp in D-Burr, making $9 an hour. A year later, I'm the senior director of project management, making 6 figures. Anything that I set my mind to, anything that I said I was going to do, I did. So for her, it had been 5 years since I'd taken a drink. I'm no longer the person I used to be. I'm a guy that does what I say I'm going to do. Sure, honey, you can have a drink every once in a while. So we took a drink together. Within 2 weeks of me taking that first drink, I was back on meth and hiding it from my family, my wife, and everybody that I knew. Within 2 weeks. So I made the decision in my mind, for addicts and alcoholics out there, everything is everybody else's fault. We are all just victims. I had decided that my wife was the devil and that it was her fault that I had relapsed and she had forced it upon me. And that this was all like God had played some form of cruel trick on me. The storm starts. So my wife and I had just bought our forever home. I took everything that she owned that was in our home and I put it in the driveway and then I changed the locks. And not only did I do that, but I got in my car and I left and took a vacation. And I was completely controlled again by the drugs and alcohol. Now, I do not want you to think for a second that I'm excusing any of the bad decisions or any of the horrible things that I did while I was on drugs and alcohol. There is no excuse. I had a decision to make. I made those decisions. So I cheated on my wife. I made her look horrible to my family. I made her look horrible to her family, right? I am one of the most convincing. How do you know a drug addict is lying? Their lips are moving. So I drugged my wife through every inch of mud that I possibly could, and I made everything her fault, right? So this was the hardest thing and the worst thing that my wife had ever been through. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know where to go. She didn't know how to fix this. So she took it to God. And she opened the book. And God carried her through that hard time. And the relationship between her and Jesus was developed. So what brought me out of my relapse and what brought me back, she invited me to go to church. Right? And all of a sudden I have this horrible, horrible, horrible moment where I'm going, wait a minute, how can this woman who I think is evil, right, that was sent here to take me off the track that God had me on, how could she invite me to go to church? Right? The Bible tells us you can't sit at both tables. You can't serve both God and Mammon. Right? You can't feast with God and feast with Satan. You can't do both. Right? You're either on one or you're on the other. And all of a sudden, this veil that had been in front of my eyes, that the enemy had in front of my eyes, was removed. And I saw what a horrible, horrible, horrible mistake I had made. So she invites me to go to church. And we go to church together. And then we get together, right? And we sit down to actually just have a conversation. And I knew that the only way that our relationship was going to move forward was if I was honest. So I told this beautiful, loving, wonderful woman all of the horrible things that I had done while I was out. And I didn't stop there, right? I knew that if I wanted our relationship to be built on the rock and the foundation that is Christ, and if we were going to have a true godly relationship, that I need to be honest with her about everything. So I told her every dirty, dark, nasty, disgusting, horrible thing that I had ever done in my entire life. Now, this woman should have got up and left. She could have ruined me, right? I told her all of my deepest, darkest, dirtiest secrets. And it's our secrets that keep us sick, my friends. It's our secrets that keep us sick. I told her everything, and I fully expected her to stand up, walk out, and never talk to me again. But by the grace of God, this incredible woman somehow loved me more. And I tell you that to tell you this. If I had not had the alcoholism in high school, if I had not gone to prison and experienced the horror of that and the horror of drug addiction, if I had not relapsed after my wife had before my wife got pregnant, if we had not reset our relationship on the firm foundation that is Christ Jesus, my son being born and what happened to him would have destroyed us. Every single storm that we walk through in life prepares us for the next storm. Every one. So, back to Cooper. Super Cooper. Coop Dog. Coop D-O-double-G. So we get to take my son home, right? And I had made some deals with God in that NICU, right? All you dads out there, I know that your kids have been in a bad situation and you start making them deals with God, right? So I'd made some deals with God. God had held up his end of the bargain. You best be sure I'm going to hold up mine. So two things happen when I get home from the hospital. And mind you, remember, I'm about 45% body fat, 315 pounds. I can't walk a mile. Number one, I signed up and started seminary school, right? I had made a promise. If God did this for me, I would do this for him. And if I want, how do we teach God to other people? How do we represent God well? We have to understand and know who God is. So I started seminary school. The second thing I did, right? I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to tell this kid who everything in life is going to be hard for, right? Everything that we take for granted, walking, talking, going to the bathroom by ourselves, grooming ourselves, taking showers, eating, feeding ourselves. Everything in life is going to be difficult for this kid. How am I supposed to tell him that he can accomplish his dreams and he can do anything he sets his mind to as long as he has grit and toughness and mental toughness and discipline and consistency and, most importantly, faith and trust in Jesus Christ? How am I going to tell him that he can accomplish his dreams when I had never even tried mine? So at 31 years old and 315 pounds, I walked into a boxing gym because when I was 5 years old, I saw Mike Tyson knock somebody out of their shoes, and I wanted to be Mike Tyson when I grew up. So I go in and I ask the number 6 greatest fighter in Kansas history, Dangerous Damon Reed, if he would teach me boxing. And he told me no. He said, John, I've seen how you train. I've seen how you, listen, I'm done with boxing. I've lived my career. I've done my coaching. I'm done. And I'm like, well, listen, man, if it's okay with you, could I just keep coming to your classes? And he's like, John, listen, it's a free country, man. You do whatever you want. I'm going to teach the class either way. If you want to come, come. I'm like, yes, sir. So I showed up early. And while I was in it, I worked harder than everybody else. And then I stuck around after and I practiced the things that he'd showed me. And this goes on for a couple of weeks. And one day Damon grabs me. He's like, John, man, why do you want this so bad? Why, what's your motivation? What's your drive? What's your passion? Why do you want this? Nobody at your size, at your age, wants to start professional boxing. And I told him about my son. And I told him my why. Well, I don't know if any of you guys know Dangerous Damon Reed, but he may look tough on the outside, but on the inside, he is as mushy as a melted marshmallow. And he told me to meet him at 3 o'clock the following Thursday. And we set off on an absolute rampage, right? In 5.5 months, Damon Reed cut 105 pounds off of me. I went from 315 pounds to 105 or 205, 210 pounds. I went from 45% body fat to sub 10% body fat with a six-pack. I went from not being able to walk a mile to being able to run a sub 6-minute mile. I could run a mile in 5 minutes and 26 seconds. For 31 years old, that's pretty quick. For a heavyweight, that's really quick. For my first professional fight, I knocked out a guy with 20 professional fights. For my third professional fight, I fought Mario Munoz, the current Kansas heavyweight champion. He'd never been stopped. He's fought for the IBO, the IBF, the WBO. Never been stopped. I knocked him out in the 4th round, out cold. For my 6th professional fight, I got to fight the Missouri heavyweight champion on Showtime. I fought him with the flu right after a breathing treatment on a sprained ankle, and I beat him. For my 10th pro fight, I fought Wayman Carter in Kansas City for the American Boxing Organization Midwest heavyweight title. Knocked him out in the 2nd round. And God has just continued to bless this path and to push me forward and to guide me and direct me and show me exactly what's going to come, right? And prepare me for all the storms that are going to come next, right? So I asked you about, we talked about identity earlier, right? What the actual change was and what happened was I chose to start looking at myself and my identity through God's eyes instead of through the world's eyes. The world tells me I'm a convicted felon, I'm a drug addict, I'm an alcoholic, I'm a thief, I'm a cheater, I'm a liar, I'm a stealer, I'm a killer, all these things, right? That's what the world tells me I am. But who does God tell me I am? God tells me I am righteous. God tells me I am redeemed. God tells me I am one of his adopted children. God tells me I'm part of a royal priesthood. God tells me that I am free. He goes before me and beside me and through me, and he's with me at all times. That he loves me and that he knows every hair on my head. He tells me that he knows me before I was born. And he tells me that he will be with me and never forsake me for all the days of my life. Once I start looking at myself through God's eyes and stop looking at myself through the world's eyes, anything can happen. So, once again, I encourage you to not forget about when you're preparing, right? When you're preparing and you're getting your radios and you're getting your storm things and your generators and your food and your ammunition, all the other things you need, right, to prepare for the actual storms. Don't forget about the spiritual storms, right? The Bible tells us that our fight is not against flesh and bone, but against the spiritual darkness and principalities of evil. So as you're preparing, don't forget about God. Thank you for your time. Thanks, brother.
Bet you thought you'd never see that here. Give it up one more time for John. As our new patch says, this isn't your daddy's prepping show. This is a little bit different of a hybrid that we've created here, and we're very, very happy to have the guests and the speakers that we do. So with that, thank you for coming to our programming for Friday. Next is the potluck. So if everyone could please move their chairs out of the area. Jonathan is going to direct us on where things are going to go from here. So start warming your dishes and getting all the good stuff. We're going to have giveaways starting at 6 o'clock, the children's first giveaway and the first main giveaway, and then the first special giveaway. He was right behind us. Thank you very much. We'll